Good evening and welcome to Worldview Live on GBC 24, where we tell the story of Africa. And in a globalized world like ours, anything that happens anywhere affects us here in Africa. So when the throat of children are slit in front of relatives, when girls as young as 11 are gang raped, when young boys and girls are summarily executed, and when the elderly are butchered with machetes, with whole villages torched and destroyed, the world cannot continue to remain silent. This is what is happening at Myanmar, and that has attracted us here in Ghana to the extent that a member of parliament in Ghana, that's the MP for Kumbungu, has filed a petition at the office of the chairperson of the Nobel Peace Committee, seeking that Aung San Suu Kyi, who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991, be stripped of that. The reason being that she is the head of the country where atrocities are being committed against fellow human beings. In the midst of all these things, we have people selling arms against international treaties. So what is happening to us on earth? This is our subject tonight, and I'm George Asekri. This evening, I have the Member of Parliament for Kumbungu, Ras Mubarak. Good evening and welcome.
Good to see you, George. Good evening.
And he just returned from Mecca, so the latest Aladdin in town. Next to the Member of Parliament is Mr. Kuku Jani. He is an international political watcher. Nice having you.
It's a pleasure being here.
And we have Iribad Ibrahim. He's the CEO of Iribad Security Consult and the security analyst himself. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, George.
I am George Asekri. So right away we start. I'll start with you, Honorable. What touched you? We went to pray, and we heard that our Member of Parliament filed a petition somewhere against Aung San Suu Kyi, and we're wondering, was that part of the religious?
It's a very interesting question, and quite exciting that you've put two cousins on the same show.
Yes, and honorable, not many people know that I'm your younger cousin.
You know, if you look at what is happening in Burma, Myanmar, it's something that we all should add our voices in condemning and raising issue with the enormous amount of atrocities that are happening in Burma. I was whilst in Saudi Arabia, I was following the news, and you know, I just couldn't imagine that in this 2017, you know, these things are happening. And I felt in adding my voice, I needed to write to the Nobel Institute to petition them to strip Aung San Suu Kyi of her award which she won in 1991. As you may be aware, it's a very distinguished, very prestigious award. And for Ms. Suu Kyi to be silent. Now this is somebody who was very, very vocal, very vociferous. And these things are happening in her own country. To the extent that some have said that there's even collusion, you know, because she's not made the attempt to condemn exactly what is happening. And it's so sad. The Rohingya Muslims have been living in Myanmar, you know, since the 8th century. Since the 8th century, you know, and as you would be aware, the United Kingdom or Britain ruled Myanmar for 100 years. So after independence in 1948, they handed over power to the local authorities. You know, to the extent that you even had some Rohingya Muslims. And by the way, the Rohingya Muslims are a minority ethnic group in Myanmar. There are about 135 ethnic groups in that country. And when Myanmar got independence in 1948 from Britain, you had some Rohingyas who were even in parliament. Fast forward 1962, there was a military coup d'etat, and the military regime put in place some restrictions that ensured that the Rohingyas wouldn't be recognized in a country that they had been living in for several years. For
Were they behind the coup d'etat?
No, they weren't behind the coup d'etat.
Okay.
You know, the coup d'etat was to topple a democratically elected government, and the Rohingyas are a minority. They were absolutely not the ones behind it. but I'm sure it has a lot of religious connotations, you know, because Myanmar is predominantly Buddhist. More than 80% of the population is Buddhist, and you have the Muslim population being about 5 or 6%, with Christian population being about, you know, just about the same figure. So they put a lot of restrictions on these people, you know. And then in 1982, I think, yes, 82, they came back again with some new laws that even made it more difficult for the Rohingyas to live within Burma. Now, imagine for a moment, George, that choose any spot in Ghana.
Yes, sir.
You know, and a particular tribe may have been there for God knows how long. All of a sudden, they are not recognized.
And they took part in the struggle for independence.
They took part in the struggle for independence. All of a sudden, they can't go to school, they can't have access to medical facilities, they can't get jobs. Their movement within their own country is restricted. And that's exactly what is happening in Myanmar, you know, and to the extent that nearly 200,000 people have been displaced. It's something that should catch the attention of the entire world. Indeed, the Pope himself has spoken about it. I have been a bit disappointed, you know, with the level of responses that have emanated from world leaders, because you would expect that the crimes are grievous enough to warrant stiffer sanctions on Burma, on Myanmar, and then also very immediate actions that would ameliorate the suffering of the people of Myanmar. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that extent of response. I mean, Turkey's done very well. Yeah. They've stepped in. They've even made a point that, look, if the Bangladeshis, and Myanmar borders Bangladesh, India, China, and what other country? Now, interestingly, it is the Bangladeshis, and even though Bangladesh is also a predominantly Muslim country, that is accommodating a lot of these refugees. But they've been overwhelmed. And because they've been overwhelmed, you would expect that nations across the world would support Bangladesh to be able to take in the influx of refugees that are coming into that country. Unfortunately, it hasn't been as one would have expected, a kind of response, you know. And I have even made a point that, look, it is because the Rohingyas are not sitting on oil deposits. It's because, you know, they don't have any gold reserves. Their side of the country, if you look at the map, you know, they are in the western part of the Rakhine state. They are in the western part of that country. You know, it's very, very impoverished area, and it's good that we're discussing it, because some have said that, but you're a Ghanaian MP, what has, you know, Burma got to do with Ghana?
Yes,
but the interesting thing is that it's a global village, as you rightly said in your intro, and we ought to condemn such atrocities as forcefully as possible.
If you've just joined us, we are live on GBC 24, and this is Worldview. We are discussing Myanmar, where a group of people are being tortured. Some are raped, some are killed. Their offense. Some people think they do not have the right to live in the 21st century. Mr. Kukujani,
yes,
live for me to live. When you are 100 or less, you die and go. I believe every human being knows this as a basic fact. So why would somebody not want another to live?
That's very strange, isn't it? That's why we always keep talking about human rights. Essentially what we have is cleansing of certain ethnic minorities. And it is very, very strange that if you look at the history of the world, these issues keep happening. And I don't know whether it's the human being that has this propensity to, as it were, dislike his brother or sister for some strange reason. And we need to look at that very, very seriously. But going back to the storyline, we've been watching this on, for those of us who like listening to international news and monitoring what is happening across the world, it's a sad story. It shouldn't have happened. It should stop immediately. Apparently, Miss Sanchu, she is sharing power with the military generals, and that has made it very, very difficult for her to make any real positive moves towards this path. But that is where she has to prove to us that For all that has happened over time, since she was in house arrest, and she came out, and the world communities all supported her moves, this is the time for us to prove to us that, look, she can talk and she has a way of doing things. Now you tell us that Israel is providing some military arms to Burma or the Myanmar government. Why should they do that? Why do people provide arms to other weapons? What relationship do they have with Myanmar? Is it to do with money? Is it to do with, because apparently there's this terrorist group within the Rohingya group, that is why they have bent, or if you look at the mayhem that was caused, you will find that this is just to clear these people from the surface of the earth. And the very good reason that you give for doing that is to use terrorism as part of the script. Okay, if it is terrorism, if there are about 100 of them, go grab the terrorist. Why cleanse children and women and everybody? Yeah. That is the unfairness of the whole thing. I understand the United Nations General Secretary has spoken to Ms. Han Shu-Shi, and there has been a huge condemnation over the world as to what is happening in Myanmar. And we hope that in the next few days, the UN itself will find some way of solving problems out. I hear the UNHCR is having huge challenges there because the logistics are not good enough. Red Cross has gone in, and we hope that other countries, like my brother is saying, that you should condemn it openly, and there should be no two ways about trying to be political about it. What is bad is bad. You cannot look at your brother and say he's a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim, but I sympathize with a Muslim. With anybody who is being justly being maltreated, and that is totally unacceptable. So let's look at how others around there will try to solve the problem.
Very bad. You talked a lot about peace, and I'm serious to talk about peace. Yeah. What could be the motivating factor of the global silence on atrocities being meted out to these minority groups?
I think, first of all, I defer to my big brother, the Honorable MP, and I commend him for taking such a bold move because we share in humanity, and more importantly for us, we share the same faith with the persecuted Rohingya ethnic group. You can pluck from some of the parchments of our scriptures where Prophet Muhammad said, "Masalul mu'minina fi tawadihim wa tarahumihim wa ta'atufihim kamathal al-jasad idha ishtaka minhu 'udwan tada'a lahu sa'ir al-jasad." Muslims all around the world, in their love for each other and sympathy for one another, are just like the human body. When any organ is afflicted with an ailment, the whole body suffers it. So Honorable MP has done a yeoman's job, and I believe this will go as far as we can push it so that we wake up to the realities of the ethnic cleansing that is taking place in Myanmar. In fact, only yesterday I took a tour at the Burma camp at our Air Force base. And of course, as we are working for Ghana's national security, we take a keen interest because sometime in November, when the budget is read, there's going to be a quantum leap in how much we spend on defense as a country. So therefore, it will be good for independent voices like ours to be able to make input as to where we think we can augment our strength as a country. And I only had, my visit to Burma camp yesterday only evoked the poignant and grisly images we've seen come out of Myanmar, quite unfortunately. So therefore, I share the same sentiments that have been shared by my cousin and the elderly panelists, that the world has to do something. You can't name all Muslims as terrorists, or you can't capitalize on the fact that a few people have decided to lay an ambush or to shoot at security personnel, so you lump together a whole ethnic group and you cleanse it. And again, Muslim blood is becoming cheaper and cheaper in the world.
Well, I'm sure those watching, some of the pictures there, you can see how people are going through. That is the Rohingya Muslims. These are even quite refined pictures.
Absolutely.
Yes, but yeah. It's quite terrible.
So I think the silence of the world points to the fact that Muslim blood is seen as cheaper than other forms of blood in the international community. Everybody remembers what happened in the case of Charlie Hebdo. about 12 people and some change were killed. And the whole world stood up in solidarity. World leaders, including some African leaders, traveled to Paris to take part in the Solidarity March. As we speak today, in the Central African Republic, Muslims are being cleansed. So therefore, these, bits and sprinkles of persecution of a certain faith would only increase the sympathy people have for transnational militant organizations, and it will not help with the peace-building efforts we're all making around the world. The world has to speak up.
But like Mr. Kukujani said, these people who are behind these demonic acts are hiding behind terrorism. And we know that when it comes to terrorism, women and children are not involved.
I think my cousin will come in pretty shortly. I think the definition of this war on terror, the global war on terror, is a bit blurred. In the Philippines, as we speak, they are killing Muslims, and they say they are fighting against terrorism. While I was working with the Palestinian government, I became privy to some classified pieces of information of Israelis persecuting Palestinians, all in the name of fighting against terrorism. So therefore, the sheer hypocrisy of the world. And again, when you take away a soul, you are carrying out an act of criminality. There are countries in the world that pick and choose who should die. And they carry out drone strikes with no respect whatsoever for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the countries they strike in. So therefore, this whole thing, juggernaut called terrorism, and everybody deciding to use whatever modus operandi. You can fight against drug lords. When you are too lethal, the world speaks up. You can fight against human traffickers. When you are too violent, the world speaks up. But there are no ground rules when you say you are fighting terrorism. And it shocks me that a religion that upholds pacifism like Buddhism, Myanmar is dominated by Buddhists. And everybody has read the history of Gautama Buddha. Look at his statue. How serene and peaceful he looks. And today, people wearing orange garbs will be slitting the throats of an ethnic group like the Rohingyas. We have to speak up against it, and the international community cannot continue to be silent.
Honorable, will it be fair to say that out of the 30-plus ethnic groups there, 135, is it the Rohingya people who are targeted, or there are others equally targeted?
It is the Rohingyas who are the receiving end of all of this. Okay. Now, it has a lot of religious connotations. The Buddhists, some of the monks have openly supported the killings of the Muslim minority Rohingya groups. Now, this thing didn't start today. From 48, when Myanmar got independence from Britain, there have been a series of attempts to cleanse, to wipe out, to eliminate a minority group simply because they are Muslims. And that is the crux of the entire issue. Now, if you've been persecuting somebody for 60 years, because I've heard people raise issue about the fact that, oh, but they went and attacked a police post, and that is what had provoked, this reaction upon an entire group. Yeah. If somebody is born in a country, you deny that person's citizenship, the person's movements are restricted, the person can't mingle, they can't go to school, they have no access to health facility, they can't marry, they can't get jobs, and to expect that they would not defy the status quo is something you can't wrap your head around.
Yes, sir.
So the problem in Myanmar, just as in Palestine and other trouble spots, cannot be solved by using violence. There has to be dialogue. People have to sit at a big table and discuss issues.
So why are you targeting Aung San Suu Kyi?
No, because she's leader of the country, in as much as she doesn't wield enormous amount of power in terms of her ability to convince the military to do otherwise. At least she we all know she has a voice. She was very vocal and vociferous in her days of military solitary confinement. And we expect that at least if she can't dissuade the army from exacting vengeance and these amounts of atrocities, at least she can speak out in condemnation.
Yes, sir.
And say enough is. I mean, that is the gesture the entire world is looking for.
Yes. Probably we are not privy to information. It's possible she's doing that on the quiet.
No. I mean, there's a spotlight on Burma.
Yes, sir.
The UN has, as a matter of fact, the UN has a report on Burma. The UN describes Burma or Myanmar. They describe the Rohingya ethnic minority as the most persecuted group in the world. The most persecuted group in the world. And this was a report from November 2016. Human Rights Watch and several other independent groups have carried out some amount of work that clearly exposes the atrocities that are being exacted on the Rohingyas by the military, a section of the civilian population, and indeed some of the monks. You know, and I find it very strange that, you know, in spite of the chorus of condemnation, she's still adamant and she still doesn't want to speak out against it. It's very unfortunate, you know, but if you look at what is happening, because some well-meaning leaders recognize the difficulties that the Rohingyas are facing. That is why, for instance, they have imposed an embargo. The European Union has an embargo on the sale of arms for the army in Myanmar. You know, the United States of America has an embargo on Myanmar. As a matter of fact, until recently, Britain had, you know, sold arms to the tune of about $1 billion United States dollars. You know, and we see some amount of collusion, you know, to suppress a very defenseless minority group who have been persecuted for over 6 decades.
Yes, sir.
You know, and what I find very strange is Israel's belligerence in all of this, because this is a country that is doing the wrong things, pressing on the wrong buttons, with everybody condemning them, and yet still they continue to give them.
We'll come to Israel for details of their action. But Mr. Kukujani, I remember I read about George Bush and Barack Obama and other world leaders, and they make a point that we cannot sit down for people to be killed. We cannot refuse to act until we begin to see pictures of dead bodies, dead women and children before we act. These are the arguments they advance in going into other countries to either stop atrocities or prevent atrocities. Why is it that when it is about Myanmar, they are not? Issuing statements from, UN coming out with a statement knowing that these are the most persecuted people in the world, mere statement, is it hypocrisy?
You know, what happens with world leaders and politicians, what they say and what actually happens are two different things sometimes. There are issues that are very confidential and are classified information. In issues like this, the intelligence is high on the hilt. You will not get that intelligence. I will not get it. But the skirmishes that goes on allows you to read into it that there's something strange going on here. So then you find Israel going in from another angle, somebody says something from another angle. Then you ask yourself, you see, at this moment in time, anywhere in the world that you cough that there are terrorists there, America will jump down on you like a ton of bricks. The budget for counterterrorism is so huge, it's unbelievable. The threat of the American empire is so real now that they don't spare no rod at all. So anywhere that they will find that, or the intelligence, the Mossad from Israel, collaborating with American intelligence, and they say, look, we think that this group of people here, we think to bring them down, things will happen. Bottom line. So it's not when you see the views of the television stories, you also have to see pictures behind the stories.
So why is it that when it comes to dealing with terrorists, there are terrorists who belong to the Christian faith. There are terrorists who belong to Buddhists, and there are terrorists who are Muslims. Why is it that when it is about the Islamic world, the world has a certain way of treating such terrorists?
Yeah, you know, the jihadist group just say that they don't like democracy. It's not what God has asked them to implement on earth. So for them, anything democratic is against them. ISIS says that, Al-Qaeda says that, all these groups.
They don't have the right to choose the kind of government
They probably have the right. But the Americans don't understand what you're talking about. So until, you know, the Islam faith, and not that I'm an Islam, is a very strong faith. In the Middle East, there's a very, very strong faith in that part of the world. And if you do not, if you clear the people and the ideology is there, you have not won the war. Yeah. And in fact, if you go to places like Europe, where there are so many issues happening, the people inside the country are not Muslims, but they just don't understand how things are happening, and therefore they recede towards these areas. We have seen how people go onto the social network and sympathize with groups that they are not spiritually connected to. Yes. So it means that wherever you see war, a certain amount of unfairness is going on. Everywhere you go and you ask, what is the problem? There is a certain amount of unfairness. Yes. My own issue is that if we want this world to be peaceful, I cannot predict what is going to happen in this world in the next 10 years. I cannot. Because things are happening so fast that if we cannot say, look, this earth is for all of us, let's just sit down and talk and dialogue and get things happening. Tomorrow, North Korea says he's going to throw missiles. Tomorrow, this man says he's going to kill everybody. And what is this? How irresponsible can we get? I mean, God will be looking and say, what's wrong with these guys? Simple, basic common sense is what we need to apply now. And people with hot mouths should stop it.
But I remember after the Second World War, it was the First World War, the then U.S. president made a point that this is a war to end all wars. And there were scholars who came and look, enough of the atrocities. And so the global community decided to come out with institutions aimed at getting peace across, so that you don't get to a stage where you think you can kill people indiscriminately. What has become of all this?
After the First World War, there was the enactment of various laws, global laws, consular ones, and those that border on geopolitics, to make sure there wouldn't be a rehash of the devastation the world suffered between 1914 and 1918. But the League of Nations failed. And then in 1939, the world went to war again. By 1945, we formed the OAU. It is still teetering on the brink of failure because permanent members of the Security Council are able to do whatever they want. And they don't care whose ox is God. So therefore, there is no fairness, there is no equity. And Daddy mentioned North Korea. North Korea has now become a thorn in the side of the U.S. Yeah. The U.S. wants to do something about the situation, but it can't, because North Korea has got a deterrent armament, that is nuclear warheads. So I blame the Muslim world in part for our weakness and our helplessness and helplessness.
What should they do when the core religious principle is peace for all, hatred for none?
We are the most defenseless.
Love for all, hatred for none.
We are the most defenseless religion in the world.
But you seek peace. That is your core mandate. So what do you do?
Ghana is one of the most peaceful countries south of the Sahara. In fact, we are the bastion of peace and stability. But we still continue to increase the strength of our military. You should have a deterrent force. It is key. Apart from Pakistan, there is no other Muslim country that is nuclear armed. So therefore, I believe we need to pluck some strategic pages from the current playbook that is panning out to call for the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries, which has a membership of 57 countries. Apart from the UN, no other global organization comes close. But how strong is their voice? Not a single Muslim country in the Middle East has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. So how do we even push for a resolution to be passed against Myanmar? But we dwell so much on the Sunni Shiite divide. Saudi Arabia and Iran that are the most influential countries in the Muslim world continue to mutually sabotage, pumping billions of dollars into buying arms to fight against the other side. When helpless people, not only the Rohingyas, go to China, the Uyghurs, they're also an ethnic group. China is persecuting them. Nobody is speaking against what is happening. So I blame the Muslim, world in part for what is happening. It shouldn't have taken an MP from a country, a secular country, to raise some of these salient points.
It
should have taken a king from the Middle East.
Men should go and tap palm wine. It will die very fast.
But
so sometimes somebody will pretend to be a fool for peace to prevail.
No, but we've pretended too long to be fools, quote and unquote, and we are taken for granted. And therefore, I believe, I'm sure this news has gone international. And the Honorable MP is now a hero, is an international hero for us. And I believe we should take a cue from this. And I'm sure, Honorable, you filed in the petition while in Saudi Arabia. So I'm sure at some point, and the Honorable Minister and Honorable MP had the opportunity to interact with some of the Saudi officials. They should take this a notch higher to raise, awareness about what is happening, quite unfortunately.
And if you are watching the screen, you can see the story. It's very, very pathetic. Just imagine yourself being in such a situation. People are killed, some are gang raped, girls as young as 11. Some communities can be destroyed, some are burned. Just look at the picture. These are human beings, and the world is watching on. And I'm wondering if diplomacy has failed to solve problems like this.
I think the Honorable MP will come in shortly. Erdogan just survived a coup attempt. Yeah. And Daddy was mentioned the stealthy way people who belong to the intelligence community behave, and I'm happy to say I'm part of that community. So
sometimes you never get it right.
Yes. So diplomacy has failed, and Erdogan is showing great leadership, and he's the pride of the Muslim world today, and he has issued a caveat that if the world doesn't do anything about its situation, he wouldn't mind stepping in to stop Myanmar. So it is only when we become strong that we'll be able to make such sweeping statements and the world begins to take us serious. But you don't have chemical weapons, you don't have hydrogen weapons, you don't have nuclear weapons. You become entirely helpless. And when people who belong to your stock are persecuted, there is very little you can do. So yes, diplomacy has fallen flat on its face because of the sheer preponderance of hypocrisy of world leaders, and therefore let's continue to tour this path so that we see the trajectory it takes us. But at some point, and mind you, even on social media, young Muslims around the world are saying if they get opportunity, they would want to go for a one-way ticket to Myanmar. We say we are fighting against terrorism, but you are giving people the raison d'etre to want to go and fight in defense of a helpless, people. So therefore, the more Muslim bloodshed we see, or the more killing we see, the more persecution we see, then you are creating a conducive, enabling environment. Even though those of us in the mainstream do not subscribe to that idea, you are creating a reason for people to want to travel abroad to fight.
Honorable, we need the political figures in the world to come in and protect our rights, and the UN comes in closely. If the UN is failing, is the Muslim community across the globe also failing?
Well, I think the UN, one would say, is overwhelmed, and my cousin extrapolated that very clearly, where you have people with permanent seats at the Security Council. I mean, I find that completely unjust. But the solution is more diplomacy.
Yes.
I sing from the same hymn book with him, except that I disagree with him on how we can get around it.
Yes.
The solution is more diplomacy instead of arming people. And you asked a question a while ago that we are in 2017, why are all of these things happening? Haile Selassie at the United Nations made a clear declaration that until the philosophy that holds one race superior than another is toppled and utterly destroyed, there will always be war. Yeah. And until that day, the dream of lasting peace would elude all of us. That's exactly what is happening. A group of people in Myanmar, in Palestine, and other parts of the world feel they are more entitled, and for that matter, they should use whatever power they have to persecute others. Now, there's so much suffering in the world that you don't need armament. The amount of money countries spend just to keep, like take the UK for instance, just to keep the Trident, their nuclear deterrent, just to maintain it, it's enough to take away hunger for half of the world.
Yes, sir.
So instead of more arms race, because what that does is that it's going to open up an arms race.
Yes, sir.
You know, and then the world is going to lose focus. Instead of focusing on education,
poverty,
on alleviating poverty, yes, people are now spending huge amounts of money on defense budget. Look at how much money Israel spends, how much money the US spends, how much money South Africa spends on its defense budget.
Yes, sir.
And these monies could actually go into helping people, dissuading people from the notion of taking up arms.
Yes, sir.
To
providing jobs, security,
to do some other bad things.
Well,
yes,
it would portray the future as chaotic if the status quo remains. But I'm just wondering, looking at how Ghana is, I have a kid sister. When she got to the university, she decided to become a Muslim. I thought she was dating a Muslim. No, she chose to, and that's her right. And I'm wondering, as time goes on, if you begin to have different religious groups in your family, will that not solve the problem?
If you look at Myanmar, what they have done is that they've even prohibited marriages amongst, you know, the Rohingyas and the others, simply because they don't want them to mingle.
Wow.
Now, Ghana is a classic example of a safe haven, you know, where there are intermarriages, yes, either by tribe or by religion, and that's the way forward.
Yes, sir.
You know, religion or tribe or political persuasion should not inhibit one from getting close to the other.
I'll come back to you on Israel, but Mr. Kukujani, you are more of a mental health man, these psychological issues. I was born a human being. I could choose to be a Buddhist today. He could be my brother. I could choose to be a Muslim or Christian. These are choices we make. So why will we see ourselves as enemies, as if these people were created by a certain God different from yours?
You know, America has made itself the policeman of the world. It will look at it like what Rome was, the empire was at the time. And what brought the empire down is looking like what America is looking like now, where you have a lot of wealth, you flaunt it, you decide to put a wall around your country. Roman Empire, they decided to put a wall. That was what brought the Roman Empire down. And therefore, the advisors in America should be sitting down and say, look, we are getting to a stage where we need to set up. I'll go back to his estimates for, budgetary estimates for the military for this year. It was about $600 billion. $600 billion for the U.S. military. They gave $3 billion to Israel. I don't know who else they've given it to. They've signed a contract with Saudi Arabia for about $350 billion for a period of time. What is this? Who is making money here? And what are you going to use the money for? Meanwhile, the financial centers in New York, Wall Street, is within your domain. You control everything. And when you look at the Rohingyas and people who are in poverty and who are being discriminated around, discriminated against, and disenfranchised, you can only expect that you can get mad people out of it to target you and bring your empire down. And you'll be surprised that in America, in the next 30 years or so, the ethnic there's about 350 ethnic minorities in America. Yeah. In the next 30, 40, 50 years, they will take over America, whether they like it or not, by just demographics. You understand? So America needs to sit and say, look, we have no choice. We have to live with these people. Let's get down to it and sort things out properly. And not to live in this fantasy world like, oh, we're going to get rid of everybody, and we'll build a wall. You build a wall, go and read history about Roman Empire. You'll find out what happened.
Everybody.
Yes, George.
In the midst of all these things, what is the interest of Israel?
Israel is an interesting country, very small in terms of geography. A country, sometimes when you discuss Israel, you are careful because someone will label you anti-Semitic. And anti-Semitism is an international crime, of course, because of the suffering the Jews went through during the Holocaust. But he said that he has a psychological background. If I were in the shoes of Israel, that underwent the untold suffering, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis.
Holocaust.
The Holocaust. When I find myself in a position of strength, I would sympathize and empathize with minorities around the world. I filed cables while working with the Palestinian embassy on women, pregnant women, that would be in labor. But because Israel has dotted the Palestinian territories with numerous checkpoints, there are times a woman is delivered of a baby at a checkpoint by soldiers. Look at the humility people are going through. The Gaza Strip today is the world's largest open prison. About 1.5 million people that cannot import cement, they can't import basic goods. And the world is silent. When a Turkish flotilla was sending humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, it was accosted on the high seas and people were killed. Peace activists were killed. The world is silent. So Israel as a country feels emboldened by the silence and tacit approval of the US of what it does. So therefore, in this hue and cry, and a total condemnation, and there is a common denominator in this. People of all religions, people of all countries are condemning what is happening to the Rohingya people. A country will have the moral right to sell arms to the Myanmar military. So therefore, I think even though you would say this is part of the military-industrial complex, and Daddy made an allusion to that, that yes, Halliburton and a host of other huge, multinationals are interested in selling their stockpile of weapons at any point in time. And they find in the Middle East and the Asian subcontinent and Africa an opportunity to stoke wars and then pick and choose, cherry pick which sides to arm. I think Israel should show some leadership. Israel should show the world that the solidarity it enjoyed while it was a minority in Europe, it finds itself now in a position of strength, and humanity and morality demand of it to behave right and not arm people who are persecuting others.
Honorable, Israel is not the world hegemonic power today. So will it be enough to say that what they are doing, they have the blessings of the US and the UN?
Well, first of all, Israel is a rogue state, and I have not minced words in calling out Israel what it is. As Ibad alluded, they have the tacit support of the United States of America. The U.S. is arming the Israelis. They are giving them a lot of support militarily. So they find themselves in a position of strength. I mean, can you imagine that in this 2017, the U.S. would embargo the sale of arms to a country? The European Union would embargo the sale of weapons to a country, and somebody would defy that. And go ahead and defy that.
Nobody will call.
Imagine what would have happened had it been any other country but Israel. They would have pulled the plaques or the racks under your feet in terms of aid to your country and so on and so forth. But I'm not surprised anyway, except that I was shocked when a court actually ordered that they seized the sale of weapons, an Israeli court. And the foreign ministry, the Israeli foreign ministry said that this was diplomacy. and it was out of the remit of the courts. I couldn't believe it, you know, but it is happening, and it is very unfortunate, and that is why, as a token of my my displeasure, we have decided to organize a demonstration, to a peaceful demonstration, obviously. We've slated the 18th of this month. The police have invited us for a discussion on Monday, and once we get all the clear, we would organize it. I mean, a group of well-meaning Ghanaians, some are members of parliament from both sides, business people, students, people who feel hard done by, people who can't stand the extent of injustices that are happening, not just against the Rohingyas, but against some other people. But more importantly, for the fact that the Myanmar administration is using these same weapons that Israel is selling to them to commit these atrocities. You know, it is for that reason that we feel we should, you know, express our disquiet at what Israel is doing. So on the 18th, hopefully, if the police administration gives us the go-ahead, we would march peacefully to the Israeli embassy, present our petition to them, and let them know that, look, as much as they are our friends, as much as we have to live and let live, they have a responsibility. And that responsibility is to ensure the peace and security of the world. But there are other you know, actions that we can take as well, aside talking about it. And again, when Parliament resumes, one of the things that I intend proposing is for the African Union to take a position. Interestingly, Myanmar doesn't have a lot of embassies within Africa, but in Ethiopia and Nigeria and a couple of other places, they have interest there. Let's impose sanctions on them. Let's begin to squeeze the nuts on them, so that once they begin to feel the squeeze, they might want to change their position. Because if they've been doing this for 60 years and it has only exacerbated, it clearly tells you that we should also up the tempo of our response to their actions.
All right. This is Worldview Live on GBC. Let's take a short break. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. This is Worldview Live on GBC 24. Mr. Kuku, you've been seeing some of the pictures.
Dreadful pictures.
On the screen. And what comes to your mind?
Yeah, dreadful pictures. This evening when people are going to go to bed, and it was a bit stressful for us, so we'll try to ask them to be a bit patient with us. Just try to let the story be told and be told the way it is.
Yes,
you know, the relationship between America and Israel, this marriage of convenience, so to speak. There's this treaty, I suspect, which allows America to come and fight for Israel whenever they have to, and Israel to do the same. Remember, they share a lot of intelligence. And for the past 50 years, they've lived like that. Essentially, in the beginning, it was Israel to be in there and to snoop on this neighboring, what we call, and give them.
There are other countries, or is it that the media is not doing enough? If these pictures were to be on the screens of every home, will the action of U.S. and Israel matter?
Well, you know, the UN itself is sponsored hugely by America. And so they have a lot of say in what happens within the UN resolutions itself. And that is why, you know, individual programs like what the Honorable is doing is an excellent thing until we the people make a lot of noise. Politicians are very, very, very dormant in issues like this. And you know, America has a lot of power now. And like I said before, if there's any suspicion that there's only one terrorist involved in this, then the bottom line is that let's clear that, let's try and sort things out there. And this fear and panic, if you watch some of the footages, half of it is fear and panic. And like the intelligence services feed on themselves, half of the time the story that they give back to their bosses are wrong. They go and find people, the wrong people, and the people take money and they don't give them the right information.
Will it also be a deliberate attempt, for instance, if, like you said, you want to cleanse an ethnic minority? So you can't just go there, so you hide behind intelligence reports.
Yes, it could well be. It could well be. It's all part. That's what I'm saying. You know, you might not find the true story till about 50, 60 years' time. When you go into the classified information, you find stories as the true issues that happened before this incident happened. The media will cover it up. Politicians will say funny things to you, and you don't get the true story.
All right. Everybody, in fact, we have just 8 minutes. Let me take your short and I'll come back for our final remarks. Moving forward, on the 18th, something is being planned here in Ghana, and I'm wondering if it will be enough to ignite similar or spontaneous actions of that nature across the world to see how these brothers and sisters could be held. After all, you admitted that they're the most persecuted people in the world.
It's a bold step the Honorable MP is taking. And then I remember I was having a chat with his colleague, and I have a good relationship with politicians on opposite sides of the aisle. Honorable Ablakwa, who sits on a select committee on foreign affairs. When Ghanaians were cuffed, Ghanaians who were repatriated for the United States were cuffed and put on an airplane for hours as if they were slaves in shackles, only for them to be told that they should take off those chains when they go to Kodoka International Airport. He registered his displeasure. Somebody should be able to tell the Yankees when they go wrong. But there is this myth or aura or veneer of invincibility that has been created around the US and its proxies around the world. So therefore, we should be able to hold the US and Israel to the same standards they set for the rest of the world. Look at how they demonize African leaders. Robert Mugabe has been demonized. Yahya Jammeh wasn't doing what the Myanmar government is doing.
Not at all. Not at all.
Look at the public outcry. Gaddafi, even when he said, Saaz hafana malayin wa sanutahir Libya shibr shibr, beat dar dar zanga zanga, when he threatened to cleanse Benghazi, he hadn't done even 1/10 of what the Myanmar regime is doing currently. But they imposed a no-fly zone over Libya, and they imposed regime change. So therefore, I believe we should wake up and smell the coffee. If you don't speak for the weak, at some point out of desperation, they will find ways to speak for themselves.
Well, let me take your final submission before we leave here.
And again, for the 18th, I think my cousin will be the poster boy for this demonstration. He's a member of parliament. He's a benign, gentleman. Certainly, before something like this happens, the intelligence committee will gather details about the figureheads. Okay. I just want to tell the Israelis he's not a harmful person. They shouldn't blacklist him. Out of shared humanity, somebody needs to speak up.
Humanity, live and I live. And once again, when the throat of children are slit in front of relatives, when girls as young as 11 are gang raped, when young boys and girls are summarily executed, and when the elderly are butchered with machetes, the whole village tortured and destroyed, the world cannot keep quiet. Your last response.
the good scripture, the Bible says that the meek shall inherit the earth. I'm strongly of the opinion that there's going to be a revolution in the world. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that, you know, persecuted people would someday, very soon, you know, get their liberation. And that would be the fulfillment of Revelation. What is happening would have to take efforts by all of us. We shouldn't sit on our oars. We shouldn't say, well, it doesn't concern us. We share in our humanity. It's a globalized village, and it's important that what is happening in Palestine, in Burma, in any part of the world, we express our outrage in no uncertain terms.
Yes,
and I would say I'm the chief instigator of this demonstration, and I'm happy that I'm doing this. My conscience is free. I think that is the way forward for all of us if we indeed want to bring about peace, justice in this world.
All right.
And I'm hoping that the African Union can also take some steps. I'm hoping that Britain, for instance, is one of the countries. Britain gives Myanmar a lot of aid than any other country in the world. I think Britain can do a lot more than they are doing now. And if the administration is refusing to listen, you know, they should pull the rocks under their feet.
All right. Mr. Wukujani, well, the Bible says you should not rejoice even when your enemy is in trouble, and that the wicked shall not escape judgment. What is going on is sheer wickedness. Should we be praying for them, or we should go and stop them through?
I think we'll do both. For those who have the power and the clout to stop it, we'll plead with them to look at it. But these are issues which are very, very complicated. But if we start talking about it and keep talking about it, somebody might sit somewhere and say, look, I think the world has to change. The bottom line is that, I mean, if you monitor what is happening around the world and even what the comments of some of the world leaders are saying in terms of environmental changes and also issues, the world has changed to a state that we human beings, especially the G7, who, as it were, have all the money and whatever to tell us how to go about our lives, should review immediately their thinking of where the world is going to go. Because if they don't, if we crash, we all crash with them.
If we crash together. Yes. If we survive. Hey, bad. Your last submission, maybe you should pray for them.
I would rather my cousin prayed because he just came from Mecca. Yes, so I think in conclusion, what I will say is that for me, I'm an observer of, you know, international occurrences, but I've not had the guts to look at some of the grisly footage that has been circulated around the world. I just can't stand seeing people suffer. I just can't stand it.
Very grotesque.
Yes, so I believe it strikes a chord in every human being that we need to rise up and do so. And I'll commend the virtual army of activists on social media that have put a spotlight on this. Only in recent weeks or days have I seen CNN and the BBC give some prominence to the story.
Al Jazeera have been very good on it.
Yeah, exactly. And then GBC should go global as well, so we can highlight some of these things because of the trickle-down effect of the media. Darfur was even lesser of a crisis than this one. Then you had Hollywood stars going to Darfur. Why aren't they doing the same for the Rohingya people? When the Roma were persecuted in Europe, we saw the public outcry. So therefore we pray the world becomes less hypocritical and see the suffering and less violent and more accommodating and tolerant of divergent, you know, views and opinions.
Well, and
thank my people for the people.
Briefly, our time is.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank, to say that the family of Dr. Nchulujani, family of Teshi, would like to thank the president, the vice president, the former president, President before, the former president, President Jerry Rawlings, who have come to the forefront of the State House to, as it were, look at how His Excellency Dr. Kofi Nyan Jani Selby the service was done.
All right.
We thank them all very much.
Thank you very
God
much.
bless them.
On the 18th of this month, God willing, there will be a sign that will communicate to the world out there that, look, let's end atrocities against our brothers and sisters. And I remember in the book of Ezekiel in the Holy Bible, if you see your neighbor doing wrong and you do not stop or help the person stop it, they may die, all right, but when you die, you have questions to answer. Mubarak, pray for them and let's go.
Let me defer to you.
Okay. اللهم لا تدع لنا في مكاننا هذا ذنبا إلا غفرت ولا هما إلا فرجت ولا هما إلا فرجت إن إخواننا في ميانمار في هم كبير اللهم فرج عنهم اللهم فرج عنهم اللهم فرج عنهم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والصلاة والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Amen. Thank you very much for your time with us. Thank you. I have been here with the Honorable Member of Parliament for Kumbungu, Ras Mubarak. He's the latest Alhaji in town. He just returned this evening from Mecca. Kuku Jani is an international political watcher. Thank you very much for coming. And Iribad Ibrahim is a security man and is the CEO of Iribad Security Consult. I am George Asekri, and thank you very much, the technical team that made this possible, Celestine and everybody.
Is he getting security contracts from the US?
Daddy.
Nice one.